So we have seen in these last four lectures how the incarnation exhibits supremely what nature merely imitates. So our next question is, how then does this kind of miracle do what those things which are intrinsically probably do? Those things which are intrinsically probable do. And that is, does it illuminate nature? And does it, by illuminating, connect all the dots of nature so that we can see what nature is all about in the first place? Well, let's look at these four characteristics that we said not only are characteristics of the incarnation, but also of nature herself. We see that the incarnation intrinsically involves this union of opposites that can only happen when the infinite descends into the finite, not destroying the finite, but taking the finite on, descending into it, and therefore by going into the lower brings the lower up into the higher. And that this involves a narrowing down, a selectivity that is so supreme that it is embodied in a single individual who gives himself the one for the many, and therefore involves this vicarious death chosen for the good of all others. So thus we see these four characteristics, and in and of themselves, when seen from a certain perspective, they seem terrible, but from another perspective, they're actually supremely good. These qualities in and of themselves don't tell us anything about the value of anything. When used in one way, we see evil. When used in another way, we see supreme good. What do I mean? Well, look at the way I've drawn it. Take the union of opposites. When you have opposites, fire and water, they are opposites because they conflict with each other. If the one is in the presence of the other, the one, by increasing, has the tendency of destroying the other. And therefore, one seems to be such that you can't have both together. But in reality, and so from the one perspective, opposites mean conflict and war. The problem is that's if the opposite merely asserts itself. But we've seen how nature is built up by opposites, that opposites actually complement each other. And when brought together, they bring out what one lacks and strengthens where one is weak. What do I mean by that? Well, don't you realize that opposites attract? If you look at your loved one, your partner in life, you find one thing, that usually they have all the strengths you lack and you have all the strengths they lack. When the two of you are in harmony with each other, then you make up for what each other lacks. Interestingly enough, this is the story of creation of humanity in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, God says, "Let us make man in our own image, male and female." Now the word man, Adam, or human, is singular, but that singular is cashed out as a plural, as a male and a female, zakar unechiva. And so what you have here is very interesting. You have that the image is singular, but that singular image, that singular species, Adam, actually is a plural. The image of God, therefore, isn't in the male alone. That's incomplete. Neither is it in the female alone, but only in the male and female together. Opposites come together to complement each other and therefore form together a synergy. What one lacks, the other makes up for. Together, you are stronger than apart. And it is precisely because of the difference, because of the opposite nature of both, that they can make up and complement what the other lacks. Think about love. What does love do? Love accepts the opposite and takes it on and appreciates it. Those who love you, they appreciate your difference, don't they? They don't try to sublimate it. They don't try to force you to be like they are. They love you for who you are, and as a result, they, through loving you, enforce your difference. It is through your difference that you become valuable, and not because you conform yourself mindlessly to them. And so it is through difference that complementarity comes, and it is through that complementarity that together the whole is stronger than any of the parts. So we see that from the perspective of one perspective, complementarity leads to conflict. From the perspective of hate and competition, but from the perspective of love, these opposites lead to complementarity and synergy. Now let's think about descent and ascent. Again, from one perspective, it's just a vicious cycle. That which goes down comes up, that which goes up goes down, and in nature it's this vicious cycle that Buddhism decries as the source of meaningless suffering. And that is because what's done mindlessly and forced has no meaning. But looked at from the perspective of those who willingly give themselves up, go down to pick up the higher, then what you have is what? Compassion and seeking. One of my favorite parables in the New Testament, these are the stories that Jesus told, is that love is the shepherd that leaves the 99 sheep to go look for the one. What does that tell you? That tells you that from the perspective of the lost sheep, God does not look at that lost sheep and cease to love her because she's lost. She loves her where he's at. He, God, loves you where you are at, but loves you too much to leave you where you're at. And so the shepherd, God, goes down into the valley, into the thorns, gets all scratched. To what? To pick up on his shoulders that sheep, and therefore takes down the higher into the lower, and by going into the lower, lifts the lower up and makes the lower higher. And so what, from the perspective of a lack of willingness, is just this vicious cycle of desiring that which is better and going down to get it, and then striving always to get, and then losing eventually and going the old same cycle again of the merry-go-round of love and death, love and life and death and reproduction. From the perspective of a willing heart becomes compassion and ceaseless seeking the good of the other because it is good, not because of what it will do for you. Take selectivity. We already saw how from the perspective of the one chosen, they have great power, greater power than the ones that are not chosen. And they could use that power to what? To show favoritism and oppress the one who is not chosen. And therefore, from the one perspective, selectivity leads to slavery, to a master-slave morality. But when this is done willingly, when the one who has power uses that power for the good of others, then that selectivity becomes service, doesn't it? The slave is forced. The servant does it willingly. And isn't that loving? I serve that which I think is valuable. The chosen seeks out the non-chosen, not because the chosen is more valuable, but because the chosen can benefit the non-chosen. And each of us is chosen in that each of us has a talent or a strength that others do not have. Each of us express a value that others cannot have. And therefore, each of us, by being different and chosen, the source of our value comes through that selectivity. All of us aren't equal, but all of us are essential. Crucial difference is this. Do you want this uniform white, or do you want a unity in diversity? A unity in diversity is like a body. Can the heart think? No. But without the heart, the brain can't think. Without what the heart can do, and what the heart is chosen specifically to do, the brain cannot do what it is chosen specifically to do. And that is why the Bible constantly uses the analogy of Christ not being a single individual, but expressed in nature and in God's people as a body, where each are necessary for the other, not because they're like each other, not because they're mindlessly equal, but because they're different, and because each serves a function that no one else can serve. Each, therefore, is chosen, and in being chosen, serves. And being chosen, therefore, becomes valuable to everyone else. And thus, each lives because others live and give for others. And so, thus, this vicariousness can again be seen in two ways. When the living live off the dead by forcing the life out of the living, by killing, then we have conquest and murder, don't we? We have the cruelty, supreme cruelty of vicariousness. But when those who live give their lives willingly for others, then we have the ultimately admirable act, don't we? The hero, the person everyone looks up to, is the person who willingly gives their lives for the many. And thus recently we've had the 9/11 bill passed. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, the 9/11 bill we agree with. Because what does it say? It says that those who ran into the building, not out of it, that was burning and being destroyed, who gave their lives to save others, through making the supreme sacrifice and showing supreme generosity, are to be valued above all else. And so the heart of the Incarnation is not these particular characteristics, but what's behind it. What's behind these characteristics that, if not there, turns it into hate. When there, turns it into supreme love. What's that difference? The difference is willingness, isn't it? When the opposites are willing to learn from each other, we get love. When the opposites are willing to descend to lift up the other, we get love. When the opposites are willing to be chosen for service and valuing, we get love. And each valuing what the other has that I don't have. When the opposite is willing to give everything up for the sake of the other, we get love. When all of this is forced, we get hate. Thus, the same sets of characteristics, on the one hand, express supreme bliss, supreme goodness, heaven. But those same characteristics can be hell. And thus the Buddhist is right. The Buddhist says what? That samsara is nirvana, that it's all a matter of perspective and mindset, and that the same thing is both the supreme example of bliss and non-suffering, and is also the supreme example of suffering in hell. The best illustration I've heard of this is, imagine heaven to be, or hell to be, this feast, okay? And everybody in hell who's condemned to hell is sitting around the feast, and before their very eyes is all of their favorite food, all of the things that they would love to eat every day. There it is right before them. The problem is this: their arms are too long. They are formed into forks. They don't have hands. And these forks are so long that, yes, they can stab the food, but they can't bring it to their mouth because the fork is so long that it can never be such that you move your arm and bring the food to your mouth. And so what happens is everyone sees that food and is constantly trying to put it into their mouth, but can never do so. And they see others grabbing the food that they like, because a lot of people like things that other people like, and there's competition, and so they can't have it, and so they push it away from the other to themselves. So as I go across the table to get the roast beef, my rival goes and knocks my fork away and the stuff away. And so we say to ourselves and to each other, if he can't have it, then no one can. Or if I can't have it, then no one can. What is heaven? Heaven is the exact same situation. Here's all this food. It's right before you. You can't reach it. But instead of competition, this is what you have. each person at that table realizes something. They realize that the fork that they can't use to feed themselves can feed others. That the food that they love also is loved by others. And so John says to Mary, wow, this roast beef is great. I bet you love this. I know you would love it. Here, have some. I can feed you. And so the difference between heaven and hell is not heaven or hell. It's love. Hell is made by hatred, and heaven is made by love. So this same picture, union of opposites, descent, ascent, selectivity, vicariousness, this same picture, this negative that's found in nature, the Incarnation illuminates it, doesn't it? What looks from the darkness of the lack of God, like hatred and cruelty and coldness, the cruelty of nature, sharp in tooth and claw, when illuminated by this Incarnation, is seen actually to be a stained glass window that illuminates the essential portrait of God as love. These same things are love. In our next segment, we will look at how this nature could be an imperfect picture of God, even though it has a perfect creator.